Big updates today from the United States as the country continues dealing with major political and economic tensions. The government shutdown remains one of the biggest national concerns as millions of Americans face delays in services they rely on every month. From airport security to food assistance and national parks, operations are slowed or stopped entirely. Officials warn that if lawmakers fail to reach a budget agreement soon, the impact will grow even more serious. Businesses are also reacting with worry as consumer confidence falls and investors wait for signs of progress. Economists say that every day the shutdown continues, the U.S. economy loses millions of dollars and more households feel pressure. American families are hoping leaders in Washington will reach a solution quickly to avoid long-term harm. Stay tuned for more updates as the situation continues developing across the country. The U.S. job market is showing signs of weakness after years of strong growth. According to recent economic data, more businesses are slowing down hiring due to high costs and uncertainty in the market. Young workers, especially those just starting careers, are finding it harder to secure stable employment with good wages. Many companies are offering fewer hours or temporary contracts instead of full-time roles. While top earners continue to feel confident, middle and lower-income families are experiencing greater stress as prices remain high and wage growth slows. Experts say these trends could lead to increased pressure on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates again in order to support economic growth. As everyday Americans struggle with bills including rent, food, and fuel costs, concerns continue rising across the country. People are watching closely to see whether relief measures will be announced soon. Immigration remains one of the most debated issues in the United States, with new challenges emerging daily. Long waiting lines for visas and green cards continue to cause frustration for families trying to reunite or secure stable futures in America. The CBP-1 application system, used by migrants at the border to request legal entry, now has hundreds of thousands waiting for appointments. Advocacy groups say the delays create humanitarian worries, while border officials insist that processing must remain controlled for security reasons. Meanwhile, lawmakers are pushing new proposals that could change employment visas, asylum policies, and refugee limits. With elections approaching, immigration is expected to remain at the center of political fights. Many are hoping for policy solutions that balance fairness, national safety, and economic needs. For now, uncertainty remains high for millions depending on the immigration system. The energy sector in the U.S. is encountering renewed scrutiny as regulators and environmental advocates raise questions about offshore wind farms and the broader push for green infrastructure. Recent filings by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and other federal bodies suggest possible health and environmental assessments tied to turbine placement and marine wildlife impact. Meanwhile, producers of fossil fuels argue that despite climate goals, oil and gas remain vital for U.S. stability and economic competitiveness. A growing debate now centers on how fast America can transition without disrupting jobs or energy prices. Some states are forging ahead with aggressive targets for renewables, while others warn of increased costs for consumers. Analysts say the coming years will be pivotal in reconciling climate ambitions with workforce realities. As communities across the nation face higher power bills or shifting employment patterns, energy policy remains a top issue for households and lawmakers alike. 5. The foreign policy front is heating up as the U.S. deepens diplomatic engagement with key global players. For example, strategic talks with China have signaled movement toward a trade framework ahead of a major summit between President Joe Biden and Chinese leadership, aiming to ease tensions and stabilize supply chains. At the same time, cooperation with allies in Europe and Asia is intensifying over security concerns in the Indo-Pacific and Middle East. Military deployments, arms agreements, and intelligence sharing are all under review as the U.S. seeks to maintain its global role amid shifting geopolitics. Domestic debates are growing over budget prioritization, with critics questioning the balance between overseas commitments and pressing national needs at home. Observers say this moment could define U.S. global strategy for the coming decade. 6. Social media companies and tech giants in the U.S. are under renewed regulatory pressure as antitrust and privacy concerns intensify. Congressional committees are investigating how platforms handle data, moderate speech, and impact election integrity. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, has opened several inquiries into market concentration, especially in sectors where a handful of firms dominate. Meanwhile, consumers express frustration over rising subscriptions, invasive advertising, and algorithm transparency. Tech workers are also increasingly vocal about workplace issues and ethical problems tied to artificial intelligence. As Washington debates legislation, states are also taking action with privacy laws and consumer protections. The outcome could change how American citizens interact with digital services and reshapes the tech industry's business model for the years ahead. 7. Healthcare remains a major concern for many Americans as costs continue to climb and coverage gaps linger. Many patients report delays in care, while insurers point to rising expenditures on drugs and treatments. The US government is considering reforms to lower prescription prices and expand access for rural and underserved communities. Meanwhile, public health officials are monitoring outbreaks of seasonal illnesses and warning about preparedness for future pandemics. Mental health services are under strain, with demand far outpacing supply in many areas. Debates are active over how much the federal government should intervene versus the private sector's role. Costs at the hospital and clinic level are driving many families into debt or forcing hard choices. The combination of rising premiums, growing need, and limited resources is prompting calls for broad systemic change. Point 8. Inflation and consumer spending are playing a critical role in shaping the US economic outlook. While inflation has eased from its peak, prices for goods such as food, energy, and housing remain elevated. Many households are spending a higher share of income just to maintain living standards. Retailers are reporting mixed signals. Some beat earnings forecasts thanks to strong demand, while others warn of slower growth ahead. The housing market is also shifting. Mortgage rates have stayed high, cooling demand in some regions and reducing mobility for many homeowners. Financial advisors caution that if real wages don't recover, the economy could slip into a slowdown or even recession. For workers already feeling the strain, the next few months may bring tough choices and tighter budgets. Point 9. Education and student debt relief continue to dominate conversations in Washington. Millions of borrowers are waiting for word on whether forgiveness programs will expand or be modified. Meanwhile, school districts are facing budget shortfalls and teacher shortages that affect student outcomes. The federal government is exploring new incentives to attract educators and assist low-income students with college access and vocational training. The pandemic years left many pupils behind, and efforts to close learning gaps are underway. But those efforts require funding, and with the budget deadlock ongoing, schools are under pressure. Parents and students are anxious about delayed payments and unclear policy direction. The choices made now could shape the workforce and innovation capability of the country for decades. Point 10. Climate change and extreme weather are hitting the US in new ways, with wildfires, hurricanes, and heat waves becoming more frequent. Coastal communities are adapting to rising sea levels, while farmers face droughts or floods depending on region. The federal government is ramping up resilience funding and support for adaptation, but local jurisdictions say they lack the resources. Insurance costs are climbing in high-risk zones, forcing some homeowners to relocate. The US is also under pressure globally to meet its climate commitments while balancing energy and job concerns at home. As voters express more anxiety about environmental security, the politics of climate are becoming a central issue in elections. The next few years will likely determine if the US can mobilize effectively for large-scale climate action. 11. Infrastructure spending remains a cornerstone of the US economic plan as large sums are directed toward roads, bridges, broadband, and public transit. The government recently approved new grants for rural broadband expansion and resilient transport systems. Local governments are scrambling to match funds and deliver on promises. However, supply chain issues and cost overruns are delaying many projects. Construction labor shortages and high material prices mean timelines have stretched out. For residents, this means longer waits for improved services, but once completed, the upgrade should ease congestion, enhance connectivity, and stimulate growth. Politicians view infrastructure investment as both economic stimulus and political legacy. For everyday Americans, the benefits will come slowly, but the promise of modernized infrastructure is a key pillar of national growth. Point 12. Cybersecurity has again emerged as a top priority for US policymakers as attacks against government agencies and private firms grow in sophistication. State-sponsored actors and criminal hackers are targeting critical infrastructure, health networks, and large corporations. The administration is working with the private sector to strengthen defenses, share intelligence, and enforce penalties for breaches. At the same time, businesses are expanding cybersecurity budgets, but many smaller firms lack resources and remain vulnerable. Experts warn that a large-scale cyber incident could disrupt power grids, financial systems, or supply chains with cascading effects. Americans are also told to be vigilant about phishing and identity theft. The evolving risk landscape means both national security and personal digital safety hang in the balance. Point 13. Trade policy is once again in the spotlight as the US negotiates agreements, imposes tariffs, and works to reduce supply chain fragility. With manufacturing jobs a major campaign theme, the administration has proposed incentives to bring factories back home and reduce dependence on foreign inputs. These moves are aimed especially at semiconductors, electric vehicles, and critical minerals. At the same time, trading partners are pushing back against US protectionism, raising concerns about retaliation and market access. For consumers, higher tariffs can mean higher costs for everyday goods. For exporters, changing rules mean uncertainty. The interplay between global trade and domestic jobs is shaping the next phase of US economic strategy. Point 14. Housing affordability remains a deep challenge in many U.S. metropolitan areas as rents and home prices start high and mortgage rates stay elevated. For first-time buyers, the barrier to entry remains steep, forcing some to postpone home ownership. Many homeowners face locked-in situations where they can't sell and move without incurring large costs. Rental shortages are pushing urban and suburban areas to build more units, but zoning rules and construction costs often hamper progress. Additionally, programs to assist low-income renters are under strain, especially given budget impasses in Washington. The mismatch between supply and demand is causing stress for families navigating tight markets. Experts warn that without policy intervention, housing will continue to be a major burden for American households. Point 15. Public safety and crime are again part of national conversations as the U.S. approaches a pivotal election year. Cities across the country are grappling with spikes in certain categories of crime, while some suburban areas are seeing increasing incidents of theft and property crimes. Police departments face staffing shortages, morale challenges, and calls for reform. At the same time, the federal government is providing new funds for community policing and violence prevention initiatives. Some voters express concern about safety when choosing candidates, making crime a campaign issue. Meanwhile, debates continue over gun control laws, policing practices, and social services integration. The outcome may affect how cities allocate budgets, how neighborhoods feel safe, and how public trust is rebuilt. Point 16. The U.S. auto industry is navigating a period of transformation as electric vehicles, EVs, gain traction and legacy manufacturers adjust their models. Incentives for EV purchases, investments in charging infrastructure, and supply chain shifts are reshaping manufacturing in states like Michigan and Tennessee. At the same time, concerns remain over battery materials, mine sourcing ethics, and global competition for EV dominance. Legacy car jobs are threatened, and workers seek new skills as plants retool. Consumers are watching incentives and charging options before switching. The transition from internal combustion to electric is not just technical, it's social, economic, and strategic. For communities built around auto manufacturing, the shift could define their future and the U.S. position in the global vehicle market. Agriculture and food security are growing worries within the U.S. as climate disruptions and labor shortages impact planting, harvesting, and distribution. Farmers report increased costs for equipment and fertilizer and disruptions in export demand due to global instability. The federal government is responding with aid packages and crop insurance adjustments, but many producers say it's still not enough. Domestic food prices continue to climb, affecting low-income households most. Supply chain bottlenecks for trucking, processing, and packaging remain problematic. Meanwhile, changing consumer preferences toward plant-based diets or local sourcing prompt shifts in farming practices. Agriculture in America is no longer just corn, wheat, and soy. It's about resilience, sustainability, and global market integration. The next decade could decide whether the U.S. remains a food superpower or struggles under mounting pressures. The labor movement in the U.S. is showing renewed strength as workers at major companies push for higher pay, better conditions, and stronger union representation. High-profile strikes in sectors such as entertainment, logistics, and manufacturing have drawn national attention. Many workers say that despite job openings, wages haven't kept pace with inflation, and benefits have eroded. The federal government has signaled support for collective bargaining and worker protections, but business groups warn of increased costs and reduced competitiveness. For many Americans, this trend signals a shift in power dynamics. If labor gains momentum, we could see more structural changes in how U.S. companies operate and how workers negotiate. For everyday workers in the U.S., the fight for fair compensation is far from over. Technological innovation and research remain critical to U.S. strategy as the country competes in areas such as artificial intelligence, AI, biotech, and quantum computing. Federal funding for R&D is on the rise, especially for national security and industrial applications. Universities and private firms are partnering more closely to bring breakthroughs into commercial use. However, ethical and regulatory questions about AI bias, privacy, and job displacement are also intensifying. Startups face tougher funding environments, and geopolitical rivalry with China and other nations adds urgency to staying ahead. Americans are looking at how these technologies will shape jobs, growth, and everyday life. The next wave of innovation may define leadership, not just in Silicon Valley, but across the country. As the U.S. heads toward major elections in 2026 and key midterms, the political landscape is charged. Voter sentiment is being shaped by the economy, public safety, social issues, and global leadership. Both major parties are organizing early, with candidate announcements, fundraising, and grassroots campaigns accelerating. Issues such as healthcare, immigration, climate, and economic opportunity are emerging as top voter priorities. Meanwhile, social media and digital campaigns are evolving, raising debates about misinformation, targeting, and transparency. Grassroots movements are also more active than ever, especially among younger voters and marginalized communities. For Americans, the coming year is less about individual races and more about broader questions of direction, leadership, and identity. The results will impact policy for years to come.